CMPA Chair of the Board of Directors, Scott Garvey.
Good afternoon. If we could take our seats, please, we'd like to start. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to all of you for joining us via our live stream sponsored by the Canada Media Fund. I'd like to take a moment to thank both of our grand patron sponsors, the Canada Media Fund, who is also our lunch sponsor, and Netflix. I'd also like to acknowledge the support of our patron sponsor and lead government partner, Telefilm Canada. Thanks to our platinum level sponsors, Eagle Vision and SIM, as well as gold level sponsors Bell Fund, Bell Media, Entertainment One, Shaftesbury, and Spin Master. Before hearing from the Minister, we wanted to take a few moments to commemorate the life of a dear friend and colleague to many of you in the room. On Monday, following a battle with brain cancer, Jay Switzer passed away at the too young age of 61. Jay was an icon. That much is clear. Just last month, he received the Order of Canada, the highest civilian honor for his contributions to our industry. His career accomplishments speak for themselves, but what was truly remarkable about Jay was just how much he passionately and authentically believed in the power of Canadian content. I can't think of a greater and more earnest champion for this industry, and he is going to be greatly missed. I'd like to now invite Catherine Tate to the stage to say a few words. As most of you know, Catherine partnered with Jay to found Hollywood Suite, one of Jay's many successful enterprises.
This is very difficult. So I have many friends around to help. So I'm honored to be here today, and I thank the Minister Joly for joining me in this salute to one of our industry's finest, Jay Switzer. As Scott said, Jay passed away earlier this week after a short and ferocious illness. There have been many well-deserved tributes in the press and in social media to Jay and his extraordinary contribution to the Canadian film and television industry. He has been described as a mensch, as kind, selfless, and generous. I really should have these glasses on, I'm sorry. As an outstanding mentor, as a great leader, as a devoted husband, brother, son, son-in-law, and as a loyal friend. Jay was all of those things. For those of us who had the good fortune of working closely with him, the old chum gang, many of you are here, his travel pals in Vegas, I know one is here, and the team at Hollywood Suite, David Kynes, Jeff Sackman, Ellen Bain, and Denise Cooper, who's also here. We witnessed firsthand every day his unwavering passion for Canadian television. Jay was the rare broadcaster who looked for opportunities to meet Canadian content obligations. Not because he had to, but because he truly loved creators and the creative process. His dear wife, Ellen Dubin, knows this better than anyone. Over his 30-year career, Jay helped bring hundreds of hours of Canadian programming and Canadian feature films to the screen. He was an incredibly generous buyer, hands-off and respectful, and a risk taker. He truly believed that artists, filmmakers, and producers knew best. He stood back and let us do the work, and then he delighted in the results. At Hollywood Suite, one of Jay's proudest moments in the last year was our record of licensing more Canadian feature films than any other of the big broadcasters in the country. In an industry where clubby cronyism has been the norm, Jay was gender, race, religion, sexual orientation neutral, long before it was fashionable or a requirement. He spotted and supported talent. He stuck his neck out for talent, regardless of sex or background. So the silver lining in this tragic passing is that Jay is still with us. For those who knew him, his goodness and loyalty remain an example embedded in our hearts forever. So please join me in a salute to the unforgettable Jay Switzer.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I'm honored to wish the Minister of Canadian Heritage, Melanie Joly, a very warm welcome back to Primetime Stage as she joins us today for a discussion with CNPA's President, CEO, and all-around good guy, Reynolds Maston. It was another busy year for our dynamic minister, and I want to thank her on behalf of Canada's independent producers for her important work on the development and launch of the Creative Canada policy framework. We now wait with bated breath for the outcome of the reviews of the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Act and the continued modernization of the television and broadcast system in Canada as we boldly embrace the digital world before us. Now, I don't want to steal Reynolds' thunder from his Q&A, but I did want to take this opportunity to make two observations for the Minister to consider. Firstly, we embrace her recent statements, making sure there is zero tolerance for sexual harassment and psychological harassment in our workplace. Bad behavior is bad behavior, and it's always been bad behavior, and it cannot be allowed to be present in our workplace in any way. We as an industry must work hard to ensure that zero tolerance is achieved quickly, and is not mere rhetoric. Secondly, I would ask the Minister to look closely at the fragile state in which we find the Canadian children's television environment these days. Consolidation has dramatically reduced the number of traditional broadcast homes for this important genre of production. Furthermore, as a result of the Let's Talk TV decision, there are fewer incentives today for the remaining broadcasters to expand their commissioning of kids' content. Statistics reveal a serious reduction in the amount of children's content being produced in Canada. This is concerning. Children's programming has long been a genre where Canada has excelled, both in the creation and the export of our compelling kids' content. It is also concerning, however, because the ways in which our children watch content is morphing before our eyes. In this evolving landscape, it's crucial that we all work together to ensure that young Canadians can find and watch domestic programming that speaks to them in a meaningful way is available however, wherever, and whenever they choose to access that content. Given the Minister's laser-like focus on ensuring a bright future for Canada's production sector, I'm confident she shares our interest in the continued success of children's and youth programming in Canada, and I look forward to working with my colleagues across the industry to make this happen. With that, I invite you to join me in welcoming to the stage the Honourable Melanie Joly, Minister of Canadian Heritage, and the CMPA's Reynold Maston.
Minister Joly,
yes,
a very
Reynolds.
warm welcome back.
Thank you. Happy to be here with you, all of you. Great to see you.
We're delighted to have you back, and I struggled a little bit because so little has happened in the past year since we were last on this stage, but we're going to talk about.
I don't know why people are laughing.
Let's pick up where Scott left off in his introduction. And talk about the most serious issue that's gripped the industry, not just here, of course, but globally, and that's the issue of harassment. You and I were a part of a stakeholder session where we briefed you on some of the efforts that we're taking to prevent harassment and address it appropriately when it does happen. Would really appreciate on this stage to hear your thoughts, because you've taken a very public leadership role since this issue exploded. What would you like to say?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Reynolds, for the question. I think, first of all, I just wanted to start by saying that I'm extremely proud of the cultural sector. Once again, and I've said it in the media a couple of times, but once again, the cultural sector has shown, artists have shown, that they're at the forefront of social change. And this conversation about sexual harassment started because of artists. We know that sexual harassment exists, and we know it has existed for years, for centuries. And so the fact that it's all started because artists started to talk about it, I think is a leadership that should be recognized. And as a female minister, part of a feminist government, this is something we take extremely seriously. So I've asked my department to come back to me with recommendations in order to make sure that there's zero tolerance in terms of harassment. And we have a role as at Canadian Heritage in actually using the tools that we have in order to not only make sure that there's a code of conduct that is followed, that there's training that is given, or that we can support good processes to deal with complaints, but also to support more women that can actually tell stories and create great content in order to create more gender parity within the sector.
Yes, absolutely. Parlons maintenant de...
Let's talk now about the Trans-Canada Pacific Agreement. This was quite a big piece of news last week. And it was clear that the government fought hard to protect our cultural industries. And we know that this was thanks to you in large measure. You worked tirelessly to ensure that those protections be included in the TPP. So thank you very much for that, and congratulations. But what does it mean for the people here in this room right now? Well, listen, when we took over power, we had inherited government negotiations already undertaken by the Harper government on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. During these negotiations, there was quite an openness to the not applying the cultural exception that we know and not applying it to the web. So I've heard from several of you the concern that you had about not having protection measures for the digital platforms. That is why I launched a campaign within the government to ensure that the cultural exception also apply to protect our culture on the web. That's one of the main reasons for which last November Mr. Trudeau, when in Vietnam, did not sign the TPP as it was then. The negotiations were not yet concluded, and this allowed us to reach an agreement with the other 10 countries. And we now do have the cultural exception applicable to the internet.
We have a trade agreement with Asia Pacific that includes a cultural exception, and that cultural exception is also clearly applicable on the web. TPP was the first trade agreement that was actually referring to digital platforms. CETA, which is the one with the trade agreement with Europe, didn't specifically refer to digital platforms. NAFTA doesn't, neither, because it predates the internet. But it was the first time that we had an agreement that was referring to a technology, and that's why we wanted to make sure that we would have a cultural exemption, even as people change their way of actually consuming content. So it's a tough battle, but I'm really grateful that it's a battle that we were able to win.
Congratulations. And let's face it, a great precedent for the NAFTA negotiations.
Yes.
Right. And you're the last person I have to tell on this stage how important it is to the people in this room that we maintain the cultural exemption. But also has to be said, for those of us who have an opportunity to meet with our negotiating team for Canada, we could not be more effectively represented. We're in incredibly good hands. So let's move to, whoa, gotta be careful with the mic here. Let's talk a little bit about your focus on promoting Canada to the world.
Yep.
We're going to talk a little bit about your export strategy, but I want to talk specifically about China for a moment, because you have a delegation who is arriving here tonight, and I know that it's been a key priority for you and your government to focus on the Chinese market. So why is that? Why the focus on China?
Well, we know that there are incredible opportunities in China, and that in order for a sector to thrive, we need to think exports. And so we will be doing the first creative industries trade mission to China. I'm very glad that I'll be leading that mission and bringing 50 organizations, many producers also, with us. And we know that this is an incredible market because of its actually of the number of people that consume content, and the fact that there's a very high growth in the sector. And so when I was there a year ago, I had the chance to meet with Minister Luo, who is the Minister of Culture of China. We agreed to create a joint committee to make sure to help our common interests and for us help penetrate the Chinese market. Minister Luo is coming tonight, and tomorrow we'll be working all day on this joint committee, and afterwards we'll be going in April. So things are moving, but clearly what we know about the Chinese market, it is the fundamental role of government in order to help making headways into the market. And so while we want to help our businesses, we know that through diplomacy and government-to-government and people-to-people relationship, we will help drive your businesses.
The CMPA recently led a trade mission to China, and it was hugely successful. So we're thrilled that you're so focused on this market and that there's going to be a trade mission in a few weeks. Let's change subjects and talk a little bit about last fall. And specifically about the Netflix deal, which generated a lot of reaction and, from my perspective, a lot of confusion. because the impression that I got from some of the reaction was that people thought that the deal that was done was intended to be a substitute for regulation, or was intended to shut the door to a conversation or discussion about regulation, rather than being a deal under the Investment Canada Act, which, as you know, and a number of people in the room may know, many agreements have been concluded that impact our sector under that piece of legislation. This was the first one with Netflix, of course, and OTT service, but it's by no means the first one. So I was hoping to just ask you, do you think those things got confused in terms of what the deal was about and what it wasn't?
I think there was a lot of confusion and also a lot of surprise. And being a Québécoise and a francophone, I understand why especially the Quebec population and Quebec market reacted to the deal, because there's a very strong anxiety that has always been there with francophones, that actually we need to protect our language and our culture in order to survive. And that the state has a role to play in order to keep, in French I would say, le fait français, so the French fact in Canada. And so I think the reaction was much more linked to the fact that there was a fear that a big OTT such as Netflix could actually participate to the assimilation of francophones, because there's not a lot of French content on this OTT, and it's quite popular. So therefore, what will children watch? What will teenagers watch? How will that replace French content? And therefore, therefore, there was a true anxiety, which I really understand. But the reality is we always thought that this was our transition plan. We always thought that we don't have the tools in our system right now to ultimately have a way to really protect our culture on the web. And therefore, the investment in Netflix was something that made sense. It made sense because it's $100 million per year net. For 5 years, there's a $25 million, so $5 million over 5 years in market development for French. And this is based on the fact that we were able to convince Netflix that the Canadian market was a great market. And, you know, there's been great co-productions, maybe Anne with an E, with the CBC, or Alias Grace with the CBC, or Frontier with Discovery, and we could have much more of that. And not only that, we thought that that would bring money into the system in order to export great content, in order for our stories to be on this platform. Obviously, there's no tax exemption that has been negotiated. As a government, we would never do that. There's also no discussion or articles within the Investment Canada Act, well, actually investment, regarding the fact that we will never change our laws or regulate. That was never part of the conversation neither. And so, while this investment is something I think that is a net benefit to Canadians, and I really hope that the company will also invest in French content. There was a great news this morning. They just bought Les Affamés from Robin Aubert, who's a great horror movie, great movie. I think that the real conversation, and I really hope that we will be able to work together, is actually the review of the Broadcasting and Telecommunications Act. This is how we can fundamentally change how we have Canadian content in our country in the future. And so I really hope that, while I understand that there's a lot of anxiety in the sector, that we can work together
and we can also work together to educate the Canadian population about the importance of Canadian content.
Thank you very much for that answer, Minister. It'll reassure a lot of people in the room, and one of the things we've been talking a lot about is let's have the public policy debate through your review, what the future needs to look like. And in the meantime, let's make great programming with Netflix. We're thrilled to have Elizabeth Bradley, one of their lead executives. She's going to be here on the stage tomorrow. So let's take advantage of those opportunities while continuing to have the debate and move things forward. So let's talk about another element which arguably got overshadowed a bit by the Netflix deal, which was certainly for people in this room, huge. And that was your announcement of stopgap funding for the CMF. And as cable company revenues decline and their contribution declines into the fund, to have the department essentially fill that gap. And I actually want to take this opportunity to thank you for that. That was a huge achievement. It will have an enormous impact on the sector. It was a source of great anxiety what was going to happen to the fund as those revenues appeared to be declining and really impacting the fund. And so to not have to worry about that is gargantuan. So a huge, huge thank you to you, Minister.
Thank you. And because I heard so much the anxiety regarding the fact that the CMF funding was going down because of cable subscription going down, I really wanted to make sure that when we announce our cultural policy, we would include that in the announcement rather than wait until the next budget, which will be in the coming weeks, to secure a bit more the sector. So what we've done is to create a backstop, but I think what also we've done is we heard from many creators and artists the importance of being able to invest at the early stage in order to have people across the country work in their different regions and create great content. And so now part of the CMF will also include some early stage funding. What we worked also is to develop the tools for you to find ways to have bigger budgets in terms of productions. So, you know, with the great work of Telefilm, we became a member of Eurimage. So that really helped also. We worked on co-production treaties. Over the past 2 years, we've been able to sign a co-production treaty with China and have new co-production treaties with New Zealand, with Ireland, with Liechtenstein, with South Africa, and we're working always to modernize our approach. So CMF funding, co-production treaties, and actually we're in the context of the Broadcasting Act revision, we'll be looking at how can, in the future, we support production and who should be part of the system of supporting production of Canadian content.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a follow-up question to that, a question that likely you won't be in a position to answer, and I know that. So it's really more of a statement disguised as a question that I'm just going to pose to you. And that is, when determining the amount of what needs to be sent to the CMF to compensate for the cable company subscription declines, what will be the starting point to figure that out? Will it be the point before the cable revenue began to decline, or at a later point? You can imagine what the preference of everyone in this room would be. But do you have any thoughts on that?
We'll see how it goes.
Fair enough, fair enough. Okay, so let us turn to another aspect of your Creative Canada framework, one which was also really embraced by producers especially, and that was simplifying, speeding up, the tax credit system at Cavco. And as you know, this was a big ask of ours going into the consultation. So we were thrilled to see it in your framework. And just wanted to ask you if there was anything you wanted to talk about specifically relating to that.
Yeah. I know Reynolds and Hélène Messier, also from AQPM, told me how much the CAFCO process was frustrating and that there was so much red tape. So we decided to act upon that. And so you know, if you look at the last months, CAFCO has been processing a record number of files, so 400 per month, and so that's great news, and they've been able to reduce by half their waiting times. So Scott White, who is now the key person at CAFCO, is there to help, and at the same time to make sure that the processes are well followed. But we always want to make sure that this conversation continues, that you give us our feedback, because as a government, obviously, we want to ease the process and we don't want this to be burdensome.
Thank you, and Scott is doing a great job, and we're so glad he's in that role. Let's talk a little bit about your cultural export strategy and the new funding that you announced. Our members, of course, are laser focused on the international marketplace to finance and to sell their content. And one of the questions I've been asked a lot by our members is, as you develop the strategy, how we can provide input into what it looks like so you get maximum bang for your buck when you announce.
So we announced $125 million more into our creative export strategy. This was actually in my mandate letter because it was to replace the cuts the Harper government had done when they cut ProMarts and trade routes. So I was very pleased to announce that new funding. And also, so concretely, where does that money is basically going? Well, now you have boots on the ground in important embassies and trade missions. You have 16 people that are there to help you. So I guess that on your tables you have a bit of information, but basically if you want to enter a market and you need help, please contact these people, because we decided not to invest as much in cultural diplomacy, which is important, but much more in trade commissioners in order to really drive business, you know, for the creative sector. Also, what we decided to do is, as I said, to push much more co-production treaties, to do Eurimage, and we will be looking into announcing our new creative export strategies in the coming months. If you have any ideas how we can do that, it would be great to hear from you. What I've always said is that we're looking also at supporting trade fairs. So, for example, the presence of Canada in important trade fairs may be, for example, at Cannes or MIPCOM. We just did that in Cologne for the video game sector. We're looking also at how we can support trade fairs here in Canada, such as TIFF, to showcase Canada and Canada's brand, and ultimately give you tools to create great people-to-people relationship, but also support in terms of marketing the Canadian sector, and that will help you actually in your business endeavors.
One final question, also relating to the international marketplace. We're very lucky to have you as our cultural ambassador, and you do a phenomenal job for us. And you've had the opportunity to travel to a number of countries and see the cultural policies that they've put in place to meet their individual needs. And you also, I'm sure, would have gotten a sense in visiting those countries what the perception of our content is in those countries. And I was wondering whether you could speak a little bit to that in terms of what you've heard.
So who has traveled internationally here in the past 2 years? Please raise your hand. Who has heard positive things about Canada in the past 2 years when traveling abroad? Well, that's it. So, you know, the World Economic Forum just released its new data, Canada as the best brand in the world right now, being the chief marketing officer, the CMO for the creative sector. I feel that I'm very fortunate of that context. But I think that what we want to do is that we want to build on that brand. So this is great that Canada is back and that we have a fantastic Prime Minister and people want to do business with us. But concretely, how is that helping people in the room right now? Well, you have the access to the trade missions and the knowledge in different key markets. You have a government that is really focused on supporting local content here at home and also helping you export. So trade, the first trade mission to China. We're looking into potentially other markets should there be a demand. And really moving the needle in terms of ultimately helping you and your business to have access to new markets. And as I said, I'm always looking for great ideas, and I'm always looking at what other countries are doing, maybe South Korea, maybe England, United Kingdom. But again, I really think that Canada has always had a very unique cultural policy, and I think that that cultural policy can be also unique in a world where export is so important.
Agreed. Minister, I know how busy you are. We're always thrilled when you're able to join us on the stage.
I have to go to question period.
And we hope, though, to continue the tradition next year and have you on the stage before question period next year.
Thank you. So, merci à tous. C'est un plaisir d'être.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with you. Good luck to you all.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Liz Shorten.